If you're just logging on now, if you could write in the webinar chat where you're watching from and who you're watching with, that would be great. And we will get started in probably a minute. Oh, hi, Atlanta. Oh, hi, Jay. Hello, Chicago. All right, we're at 7:01, so I think we're going to get started here. I want to welcome everyone to the Anti-War Action Network's Resisting Political Repression panel. We feel like this is a critical time for this type of conversation, and we're excited to have you be a part of it. If we could go to our next slide, I'll talk you through who our speakers are going to be tonight, and then I've got some introductory remarks. Okay, so my name is Meredith Abbey. I'm from Minneapolis, where I do work with the Minnesota Anti-War Committee. But today I'm wearing my Anti-War Action Network Steering Committee hat, and I'm welcoming you all here. Our first speaker is going to be Jess Sundin from the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. Then we're going to go to Maya Sanchez, who is representing No Ship, New Orleans Stop Helping Israeli Ports. Then we're going to go to Connor, who's going to represent the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Action Network. And then we're going to go to Natalie Rath. Natalie is a member of University of Minnesota Students for Democratic Society. And then who's going to wrap it up is our friend Carlos Montes from Los Angeles CSO and also the Committee to Stop FBI Repression. So welcome. If we could go to our next slide. I really wanted to draw attention to this report that AMP came out with, and I'm going to put the link to it in the chat. Actually, I don't know if nope, I don't have access to that. So you're just gonna have to Google it. But the American Muslims for Palestine released this report this summer, called How Anti-Palestinian Repression is Building Authoritarian Precedent in America. And what they argue is that the Trump administration, by targeting our movement, isn't trying to create a chilling effect in this country, trying to increase their own power, and trying to punish anyone who challenges the Trump administration. And they articulate that this isn't just about going after Palestine. This isn't just about going after immigrants. This is about literally shutting down dissent in this country so that people cannot resist Trump. Their report goes through the tactics used against the student and community activists that are protesting for Palestine, which includes illegal detentions, revocations of student visas, teaching visas, work visas, arresting people, kidnappings, deportations, home raids. And I just think it's really important to understand that these tactics have been used before, which you're going to hear from, for example, Jess. But what we haven't seen is sort of this used on this scale. Like, so the scale of these tactics is what is a significant change. Also, the report goes on to talk about the fact that Trump's Department of Education is weaponizing claims of anti-Semitism to vilify the anti-genocide movement, and particularly student activists. And I think that that's important to note as well, that like weaponizing speech to sort of target people who are saying things that are dissent is another sort of like escalation in terms of the attacks on our movement. I think that the news media has done a really good job of talking about Mahmoud Khalil, but his story is just one story, and there are actually lots of stories that are like his, including some of the stories that are going to happen today. Not in that the scale of the repression, for example, that happened against him, but in that there are lots of acts of repression that are happening all over this country. And what we have to do is fight back against those small actions, fight back against those large ones, because the fact is that we need to defend our movement and sort of preserve our right to even organize. Today, the Trump administration announced that they're going to screen actually for anti-Americanism in immigration applications, and CNN said the policy update did not give specific definition for anti-Americanism, only saying that this included those who supported quote-unquote anti-Semitic terrorism, anti-Semitic terrorist organizations, and anti-Semitic ideologies, which makes it look pretty official that now the Trump policy is to deny immigration benefits to anyone who supports Palestine. So AWAN is a new network. We have some members that are like in the Minnesota Anti-War Committee, which have been kicking ass for 27 years. But we also have other committees like the South Florida Anti-War Action Committee, which just started this summer. And in our meetings, there have been an increasing number of unintended arrests that have been reported. And when I say unintended arrests, I mean, I'm not talking about civil disobedience where people purposely have decided to use getting arrested as a tactic. We're talking about the fact that the state has decided that they're going to arrest people, not that we've decided that we're going to get arrested. And so these unintended arrests have been increasing. Our activists are being targeted for marching in the street, for car marshaling, for being at public meetings and chanting. And so what we need to do is defend this right to dissent, because dissent is not a crime, and we refuse to be treated as if it is a crime. And so we have organized this webinar so that activists can share with each other how they have fought back against political repression, so that we can stand up for ourselves, so we can stand up for our community, and so we can stand up for our movement. Okay? And so our first speaker is going to be Jessica Sundin. I've known Jess Sundin for a long time. Jess is a founding member of the Minnesota Anti-War Committee, and her home was raided by the FBI in 2010 as a part of a material support for terrorism investigation into the anti-war and international solidarity movement. And my home was raided as well. Jess and I were both members of the Anti-War 23. She helped found the Committee to Stop FBI Repression to lead the fight nationally for the Anti-War 23, and the organization has gone on to do more than just defend our original case. The Committee to Stop FBI Repression has been doing work against political repression now for numerous different activists, for over a decade. And we're excited to have Jess here to give her experience for what works to fight back political repression, because unfortunately, lawyers will give you bad advice. Lawyers like to tell people to be quiet and to just sort of like try to hang low and not get noticed. But the fact is that we need to prevent these cases from even reaching the courtroom. And that's part of what the Committee to Stop FBI Repression is really practiced. And Jess has skills to be able to share that with us. So please welcome Jess Sundin.
Thanks, Meredith. Really nice to be here with all of you today. Some of you I know, and some of you I haven't met yet, but I hope to one day. As Meredith mentioned, I began my career as an anti-repression activist the day that the FBI came to my door, September 24th, 2010 at 7 in the morning. The raid of my home, Meredith's home, and others is part of a coordinated action by the FBI, where 72 agents across the country raided 7 homes in Chicago and Minneapolis, as well as the office of the Anti-War Committee in Minneapolis. They delivered grand jury subpoenas to 14 people and attempted to question several others, not only in Minneapolis and Chicago, but from North Carolina to Michigan to California that day. The search warrants said that the FBI was looking for evidence of material support to foreign terrorist organizations, and that a Chicago grand jury was impaneled in hopes of bringing terrorism charges against us. So in addition to the raids, that day we were delivered those subpoenas or orders to testify to the grand jury. In the following months, 9 more activists were subpoenaed. So that's how we got to the total of 23. And out of the same investigation, but not necessarily the same prosecution, there were 2 other cases, federal cases brought against 2 movement veterans. One being Carlos Montes, who you will hear from later, a historic leader of the Chicano liberation movement in Los Angeles, and also Resmia Odeh, an icon of the Palestinian liberation movement, who at the time was living in Chicago. So I'm going to talk about the raids and the grand jury itself, but then also the work we did to defend ourselves and our colleagues. So with that, 7 a.m. I mentioned FBI shows up at the door. I didn't know they were coming. I don't think any of us ever imagined that that was happening anytime soon. Um, the first little tidbit of advice I want to offer, should the FBI come to your house, the first thing that you, or other law enforcement, you got to say is, I do not consent to the search. Why? Well, one, every lawyer will tell you that's what you should say. Same as if you get pulled over by your car, but I'm talking about raids of your house. And why is that? If you don't consent to the search and it was executed improperly, anything they find can't be used against you in court. Um, but also, it can make the action stop. At our house, my partner said that to them, and they all froze. Uh, and then the head FBI agent was like, "Never, it doesn't matter if you consent, we have a warrant." So, my second piece of advice is read the warrant. Because in Chicago, there was a typo on the warrant that was brought to one of the homes. And when the folks, the activists in that house read the warrant, they said, "This isn't our address. We don't live on whatever street address this is in Minneapolis," because that was the typo, that we're in Chicago. And so the raid was stopped for a couple of hours until the judge issued an edited warrant. But the fact is, to legally raid your home, they have to have a warrant, and it has to be proper. So these are ways you could stop a raid in its tracks with any luck. That didn't fully stop the raid on our homes, but it's important advice to remember. The next is the FBI would love to talk to you while they're searching your house, but you cannot talk to them. Again, any lawyer will tell you this, and I will too. There is nothing, you can't get anything by answering any of their questions. There's nothing that will make that day easier. And the only thing that might happen is it would place you at risk of other charges. And the example I'm going to give is a made up example. But if the FBI asks you, "Were you at a meeting with Meredith on Wednesday night?" and you say, "No, no, I wasn't," because you thought you remembered that it was on Thursday, but you were also at some other meeting on Wednesday and she was there, but you forgot, you have just lied to federal agents. And that is in and of itself another offense. So don't talk to them. Again, the only thing you could do is help them with their prosecution of you. You cannot help yourself that day by talking to the FBI. And then the last thing you need to do when the FBI shows up is phone a friend. In my case, the FBI did seize my phone. However, I insisted on the right to call an attorney. I called an attorney with the National Lawyers Guild. Through him, he was able to get the word out to other people across the Twin Cities that this was happening. My partner was able to leave the house with her phone, and she called some of our comrades in the movement, and we learned that we were not alone, that this operation was happening across the country, but also we were able to begin to rally support. So that's my last very specific piece of advice. Should you ever be the subject of an FBI raid, those are the things you need to keep in mind. Don't do anything that might help them. I mentioned that in our case, so the raids happened. They took all kinds of things, phones, computers, my passport. The search warrant said they wanted any correspondence with anyone living in Palestine or Colombia. They took books off my shelves, photographs, videos, all kinds of things, mostly activisty things like flyers from anti-war committee demonstrations, sign-up sheets that hadn't been data entered yet, darn it, and whatnot. So I just think, just keeping in mind, the warrant says what they can take, and that's part of what you want to read. Because word had gotten out in our city, I think at most of our homes and at my home, there was a lawyer present before the raid was done. She wasn't there from the beginning, but was able to observe a lot of their activity in our home. And that's important. Again, it's just part of doing everything you can to limit their opportunities to use something against you. So they leave our houses, but the reporters are on our front lawn. The community is asking what's going on. And we have to very quickly begin to think about how we are going to talk about who we are and what is happening. Now, I mentioned that I called a lawyer. The advice my attorney gave me was that I could say anything that I've already said all the time publicly. And all of us here, we're activists. So we're always saying things, right? Things I already said it. I don't need to tell about the secret meeting I had on a delegation in another country that I never gave a speech about and never wrote a newspaper article about. But everything that I've done publicly, I can and should speak about. And so we began from the very first day to start to build our narrative about who we are and what was going on. We were all of the common view that we had done nothing wrong. Our international solidarity work was just like the work had been done by the other parts of the movement for not just years or decades, but generations before us. Um, we, in addition to believing we hadn't and each other hadn't done anything wrong, we were absolutely committed to, on the one hand, we wouldn't be silenced by what they had done, instead continuing to advocate for Palestine and Colombia and against US policies of war and exploitation, but also that we could in fact use the attack upon us and our defense campaign as a platform to continue our international solidarity work. For me, that was something that felt really important because what I was doing was important to me. And an instinct might be a lot of people's parents might suggest that they should shut up, don't talk about it, pretend it never happened. The FBI already knows. That's why they came to my house. They already know what I think, and they are attempting to prosecute me for thought crimes. And in fact, that's how we talked about it. The FBI are the political police in this country. That was true in our case, and I think we're seeing that in these cases now. The political police now includes other federal agencies like ICE. But at the end of the day, understanding that this is a political attack and being able to talk about it directly was something that was helpful to building support. The other thing we did was try not to be weird. We want regular people to think what's happening to us is bad. So I am not trying to be the most revolutionary, the most radical, the most unrelatable character ever seen on TV news. I'm not trying to look like that guy. I want to be somebody that people know, can relate to, and can see themselves in. In our case, I think at least half of us were union activists or union members. Also, again, at least half of us were parents, several of us the parents of young children. One of our group was is a great grandma. Several of us were queer. Some of our group were Palestinian. We really led with that we are people from the movement and we're people just like you, whoever's watching the news at home, right? That's a really important step you need to take. The last thing is just when I say about building a narrative. So the FBI has a search warrant that maybe the news has. Maybe they have a spokesperson that says what this case is about. But what the FBI says the case is about is not what we would ever say the case is about. And if we don't say what the case is about, the only story is what the government says or what the government documents show. So it's really important for us to tell our own story in our own words. Our public defense campaign was started the day of the raids with a solidarity meeting in a church in our neighborhood with hundreds of people. I mentioned that a bunch of us were union members. I was a member of AFSCME, and it was just a few weeks before the AFSCME statewide convention. We got a resolution passed at our convention in defense of the AFSCME members who were part of the raids in our town. That resolution became the basis of solidarity resolutions, not only for unions and other organizations across the country, but even state legislatures in our city or in our state. So I believe it was 1/3 of the Minnesota state legislature signed on to a letter supporting us and denouncing the repression against us. We held protests outside FBI offices, outside our senator's office, outside an event where Eric Holder, the US Attorney General, came to town to talk. That was a wild one. But we, instead of sort of hiding or tucking away, we came out firing, with full fire and heat, hands down, no holds barred. The last thing is we made it a national campaign. On the one hand, it was people across the country that were attacked. Most of the activists that were subject to the grand jury were from Minneapolis and Chicago. I think there was one other person from Michigan, but in the main, that's who was the center of the case. But we made it a national campaign. We had folks from across the country and the world who organized protests on when we called for national days of action. Thousands of people signed online petitions. We lobbied not only our local legislators, but we sent teams to DC to lobby senators and congressmen to urge them to direct the DOJ to leave us alone. Um, all of this is to say it was a very aggressive public campaign. The last thing I want to say, I know I've gone over time, I apologize, is we also chose to wage an aggressive legal campaign. Now, legally, we never got to court. There were no charges ever brought against Meredith and I in this case. However, they never said, oh, never mind, we give up, you're free to go. They kept us hanging for years. So, what did our legal campaign include? The first step was attorneys sending letters to the prosecutors that none of these people will be testifying. They'll be standing on their constitutional rights, free speech, freedom of assembly, and freedom of association, and the right not to incriminate themselves. And so none of them are testifying. We had three of our activists who, after being refusing to testify, were resubpoenaed, which means the government issued new subpoenas, hoping to extra scare them. And instead of being extra scared, we made them famous. We were like, Sarah, An, and Tracy are the best people you have ever known. The whole world will know them and will stand to defend them. And did. And then the last sort of very particular thing I'll add is the FBI case, the search warrants were executed based on an affidavit by an undercover agent. It didn't take us very long to figure out who she was and who her associates were. But that said, her affidavit or her sworn statement about how terrible we all were was under seal. And we fought a legal battle to have that unsealed. We did that knowing that some of us had had spicy conversations with her. But spicy conversations are not crimes or evidence of crimes. And we were very confident in our choices. But at every turn, on the legal front, on the public campaign, we were just 10 toes down aggressive. And then the last thing I'll say is instead of siloing ourselves and standing alone, we linked our case to other cases of political repression. So we stood with Palestinian, Iraqi, and other Muslims, Somalis in the Twin Cities who were targets of political cases that had a similar basis. And instead of hiding from them, which a lot of their communities had encouraged many of them to do, we stood with them and both gave them strength and said, they're just like us and we're just like you and you should support all of us. So my time's way past over. I apologize. I did my best. I know there were a couple other cases Meredith hoped I would address, and maybe we can in the Q&A. But regardless, I'm glad you're here today. And I can say almost 15 years after the raid on my house, we're fine. We did it. We fought back stronger than ever, I would say. And it's still free Palestine every day. Thank you.
Awesome. I hope people are clapping at their home watch parties because that was awesome. Jess knocked it out of the park. That's exactly what we're looking for. I mean, the fact is that if you are, being investigated by the FBI, a lot of people will tell you incredibly wrong things for what you should do. And so Jess really laid it out nicely that there is, there are steps that you can take to defend yourself, to defend your movement, to defend your organization. And not only do they work in our case, but the Committee to Stop FBI Repression has used them multiple times to defend other people. So, and feel free to ask about those in the Q&A, but we really do have a playbook and the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, and it works because the fact is that at the end of the day, these are political cases. So we need to treat them like they're political cases and not like these are about whether or not somebody actually committed a crime, because there wasn't actually a crime. All right. Our next speaker is going to be Maya. So Maya is from No Ship, which is in New Orleans, although she just recently moved to Chicago. So if you're in Chicago, welcome Maya, because she's now going to be with you. And so Maya was subjected to a lot of academic repression and harassment by Tulane prior to and following the encampment last year. And this is a part of obviously a larger wave of campus protests that happened all over the country. And we're excited to have her speak to No Ship's involvement in the political defense campaign of the 14 student encampment protesters who were found not guilty by a judge last year. So let's welcome Maya.
Thank you, Meredith, for the introduction, and thank you, Jess, for everything you said. It was really great. Um, I like Meredith said, I'm with No Ship New Orleans Stop Helping Israel's Ports. We were founded shortly after October 7th in November 23, initially to oppose New Orleans, the Port of New Orleans, and the Port of Ashdod, which is in Israel, to oppose work between them and collaboration between the two of them. Ultimately, there's not a ton of stuff there actually, so we've become more general BDS work, end all trade, cut all ties. Have a lot to say, but I'm going to try to speak fast to get through it all. And I think it's important to understand the lay of the land in New Orleans. Prior to October 7th, there was very little Palestine organizing other than JVP. But after October 7th, existing orgs in the city started doing Palestine solidarity work, and No Ship formed in that time, and the student organizations were also doing Palestine campaigns. Another thing about New Orleans is that our police department is closely watched by the federal government under a consent decree because of a long history of abusive and unconstitutional policing, which is to say, well, other institutions and police departments don't fall under this category. They're not watched in the same way. So we experience arrests, I guess, in a different way than I think you would traditionally think of. Um, for example, we've had arrests by Harbor Police and Tulane Police, or we've seen arrests from them. So, in general, protests, large protests, are not met with political repression, and we're able to take the streets pretty easily. But we have been seeing a lot more arrests because of pro-Palestine work. The encampment at Tulane was probably the most notable of that, which occurred in May 2024. It was erected by students at Tulane and Loyola University. It was fairly brief. It lasted 36 hours with overwhelming support from the New Orleans Palestinian community, the allies in that community, and No Ship as well. During the erection of the encampment, 7 protesters were immediately dragged away and arrested. I believe that was by Tulane police, but New Orleans police were present on mounted officers that were causing physical harm to protesters. So there was a student that was kicked in the head by a horse. Really not great. 36 hours later, at 3 a.m., Tulane police and over 100 state police showed up with armored vehicles and tactical gear, pointing assault weapons at peaceful protesters, students, and community members. There were 14 students left at that time sitting on the sidewalk holding hands, getting arrested one by one. So as soon as these arrests happened, organizers were quick to get started on action. We had anticipated arrests for the encampment, but because of prior arrests we've had experienced in the movement, which I'm not going to have time to touch on, but we had previously dealt with, kind of like Jess was saying, lawyers maybe telling us not the right thing to do, and some backwards elements that led us to be more prepared for the arrest that then happened at the encampment. So what the first thing that we did in advance of the action was we made sure that we had contact information of all of the participating folks that were aware of the risks at hand, the possible risk of arrest. And we got their information to then prepare flyers with contact information for local jails, DA, and the entity most likely to be bringing the charges on these people. The flyers were used to immediately alert the public when people got arrested. And usually there were names included, which we had consent from the folks that were arrested to use their names, but we did a lot to encourage them beforehand that it's really important to be public about who you are and what's happening and what happened. So we had flyers ready to phone zap folks, and and yeah, so that led, like I said, we were ready, we were more prepared for the encampment defenders pro campaign. The day one defenders, sorry, I'm wrapping up. The day one defenders were split up. They had different court dates throughout the following year. There were 7 of them. Ultimately they were all found not guilty or the charges were dismissed. The other arrested folks were all tried together. It was the first trial related to encampment arrests in the whole country, and we felt a lot of pressure because of that. So to kind of focus in on that, in advance, we were doing flyers, call-ins to these folks. We had detainees released within hours without bail because of those efforts. And then once we were getting into like the trial stuff and court dates, we were doing press conferences, we were packing courtrooms, we were having rallies outside of the court, lots of pressure campaigns and public statements on social media. I'm totally out of time, but all of this to say, all 14 of the students that were arrested, all of them, all 21 total, were found not guilty or their charges were dropped. The state used tons of resources to try to bring these people down, and it got them nowhere. The judge commented even and said that he can barely get one police officer to show up and testify on behalf of a murder trial, and there were dozens for students doing you know, not illegal things. So yeah, so I think, to make a long story short, it's not easy. It's definitely not easy, but you have to put yourself out there, be loud about what's going on, try to get comfortable with the idea of being out there, and because that's how you're gonna get out of it. And last thing, there's someone that had an arrest in October 2023 related to Palestine work, and they did not follow kind of what I've just gone through, and they are still in the legal process, and it's been almost 2 years. So yeah, sorry I talked way over, but thanks for letting me kind of lay it all out for y'all. And yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks. Let's give it a round to Maya, especially our folks at our home watch parties. I think you did a great job of laying out that it's about that public fight. That's what gets results, because we can win in the court of public opinion, because the fact is that we do have a just cause. We are talking about issues that are important to people. Like, nobody wants babies being killed with US tax dollars, right? Nobody wants like to be funding this mass genocide. And so talking about it, making it a public thing, then puts pressure on the government to, make those charges go away, or to, for example, then makes it hard for people to want to, say you're guilty because you're just so wonderful and adorable. And people are like, I like that person. I want to be like that person. I don't want to lock that person up. So thank you. All right. Our next speaker is going to be Connor. Connor is from the Jacksonville Palestine Solidarity Action Network. And on May 27th, 3 organizers, including 2 JPSN members, were unjustly brutalized by the Jacksonville police after being targeted during a city council meeting. And Connor was dragged over a row of chairs by crooked cops. And unfortunately, I have seen the video. It went viral. Like, I mean, because it was just a completely outrageous response to people just like literally saying, "Hey, we would like our government to stop killing people." I mean, that's a ridiculous response to that. So Connor was dragged over these rows of chairs by crooked cops, and then JPSN successfully got him released through a mass mobilization. And we're hoping that Connor can talk about how they built a campaign that not only defended their activists, but also built their group. Because at the end of the day, we need to also be growing our movement, right? Keeping ourselves out of jail, that's good, but also growing our movement, even more important. So please welcome Connor.
Hey, thank you, Meredith, for the introduction. I'm Connor. I was arrested on May 27th with two other organizers for speaking up at our city council public comment, just in support of Palestine. Like Meredith said, two of us were brutalized. I was flipped over benches, but we were able to politicize and publicize the arrest by releasing the video pretty early on, despite our lawyers telling us or advising us not to. This resulted in a mass mobilization of the community. Immediately after the arrest, our coalition of other organizations that we built with, who are also feel disenfranchised by the corruption of our city council, followed us from City Hall to the jail. They stayed out all night, and in the morning there was a rally organized by the various organizers, including one who had just gotten out of the jail at 3 a.m. And then after the rally, they all marched to the release area where they stayed until I was released at 10:30 that night. And it ended up being our most successful month for bringing people into the cause for Palestine. We saw an upsurge ever since we've seen an upsurge of people joining at our monthly recruitment meetings, and there was even like someone walking out of the jail who was not arrested for anything political. He had a keffiyeh, but he had been just been wearing a keffiyeh when he was arrested. He walked out, and now he's a prominent member of our comms committee. By politicizing this arrest, we were not only able to get me released, but also bring more attention to the cause of Palestine, the corruption in our local politics, and pretty soon we will be launching another campaign with a rally on Monday to demand that the charges be dropped, because not only have they gone through and filed the charges, but they have escalated one of my misdemeanors to another felony in retaliation for me declining a plea deal. Thank you for having me.
So it sounds like Connor's at the Jacksonville Watch Party, which is awesome. We're glad that you're there with support from, your community and from your committee. I think it's important that y'all in Jacksonville reach out to us, the Anti-War Action Network, so we can amplify those calls. As just talked about, it's important to remember that we're part of a national movement and not just a local movement. And so, of course, we here in all the UN cities would love to support you and your activism and support the call for demanding that the charges be dropped. And we wish you the very best of luck.
Thank you very much.
You bet. We're going to go to Natalie next. Natalie is an activist with the University of Minnesota Students for Democratic Society. And Natalie helped lead the defense campaign for the students who occupied Halimi Hall. And Halimi Hall is actually, unfortunately, not called Halimi Hall by the point of view of the University of Minnesota. But part of what they were doing is trying to rename the building and draw attention to what was happening in Palestine at the time. And some students occupied the building, and then there was a larger community action outside. I was a part of the larger community action outside, and students were arrested, and alumni were arrested who were protesting inside, occupying that building. But then they were targeted with charges from and punishments from the University of Minnesota, but also from the city attorney's office. And a alumni who was targeted by the city attorney's office was actually charged with a felony. And they won a lot of victories through their defense work, both targeting the University of Minnesota and targeting the city of Minneapolis. And we're really excited to have Natalie here to tell us how they did it. So please welcome Natalie.
Hello, thank you for that wonderful introduction. Thanks for having me. So yeah, I'm Natalie. I'm from the University of Minnesota chapter of Students for Democratic Society. I have some just pictures as references. But yeah, I'm going to talk about some of the repression that we experienced following this action of the occupation of Halimi Hall last October. I was one of the 11 people arrested there. And yeah, it was a long process. So if you're unaware, I mean, Meredith kind of spoke about it, but it was a building occupation with the goal of putting pressure on our administration and the Board of Regents after months of students demanding for divestment and after agreements that were made during our encampment last spring that were not being followed through on. Classic. And it was following months of growing repression, attacks on academic freedom, and silencing pro-Palestine voices on campus. So we know that the only way to fight this repression is to stay united and to stand up and fight back. So we decided to escalate. The police presence was extreme during our action, including over 30 UMPD, MPD, State Patrol, and SWAT cars. Myself and the other protesters were forcefully arrested by UMPD, along with multiple members of the press being detained, which you can go to the next slide. So some of the press were being detained even though they were clearly wearing marked press vests. Yeah, and so we ended up spending over 36 hours in Hennepin County Jail on a probable cause hold for charges of trespassing, property damage, and riot. While we were in jail, SDS held multiple rallies and press conferences outside of the jail every day we were in there, and we could actually hear the protests from inside of our cells, which was really cool and good for morale for sure. And we also held call-ins during this time targeting the city attorney's office, and then also fundraised for potential bail funds online. While we were in jail, the university president, Rebecca Cunningham, sent an email out to the entire student body containing blatant misinformation and painting the protesters as dangerous threats. And so, yeah, a big part of our strategy was to make every part of this process very public and political. And this is especially important in those early moments to gain mass support and apply public pressure and kind of switch that narrative over on our side. We ended up being released with no bail after being held hours longer than the 36-hour hold. And today, 10 of us are still without legal charges, although the threat remains, as Hennepin County is still reviewing charges that the university police submitted for a second time in an effort to push the county into prosecuting us. The first time they submitted charges, the county sent it back to them because of lack of evidence, and now they just resubmitted it. But yeah, and then, yeah, as Meredith said, one of our protesters, Robin Harbinson, was given a bogus felony fourth-degree assault of an officer charge without ever putting hands on an officer. And battling this charge was another important part of our campaign. We targeted the city attorney with call-ins and made sure we did pack the room and protest outside every one of his hearings. Today, that charge has been dropped after Robin completed a restorative justice option that was only offered because of this public support and politicization. Yeah, so you can go to the next slide. Following our release, we began a very long and very painful academic disciplinary hearing process with the university. This started with the students who were being arrested put on interim suspension, revoking our abilities to attend classes, evicting some students from their campus housing, and losing their jobs. And in this time of need, it was the movement who showed up for me and my fellow arrestees, offering us places for the evicted students to live, and then also accommodating our meeting and organizing spaces for those who couldn't be on campus. Yeah, and then these are some of like the graphics here. So to appeal these suspensions, each one of us had to go through individual hearings to prove that we weren't threats to university safety. Each one of us had a hearing, or every time each one of us had a hearing, SDS posted call-ins for support, targeting the U of M president and the Office of Student Affairs. This pressure ended up being very impactful, and our interim suspensions were dropped. After this, we had a second round of individual informal hearings where we were pushed into talking about the action's details, even though we were still facing potential legal charges. And our council fought really hard for this to be a group hearing because group hearings are more strategic for political campaigns, but admin would not budge, attempting to alienate and separate us. So yeah, after a mess of different informal hearings, their process is so stupid. And I was gonna say, like, every university's process is different, which is why I'm giving details on this, but like it's different everywhere you go, and that's how you learn from it. But yeah, we received varying informal outcomes ranging from 1 semester suspension to 5 semester suspension, which was mine, which is 2.5 years of suspension. In addition to the suspensions, the administration decided that all students must pay over $5,500 in each in restitution. And there was no reasoning given for the arbitrary varying suspension lengths. But today we've come to find out that it was based on our demeanor and how much remorse we expressed in our meetings. These outcomes were given based solely on students' proximity to the building. No evidence of individuals' actions was actually brought forward. And at this point, we had requested formal hearings to challenge the outcomes we received. So this process was months long, full of ups and downs, and overall a kangaroo court that made our wonderful lawyers very frustrated. We faced challenges from the openly Zionist hearing chair, including inflexible scheduling, denying requests of an in-person/hybrid hearing, and of a public hearing. So SDS made these challenges public every step of the way, revealing to our community the unfair tactics that their own university was using against its students. And this public pressure was successful in getting the biased hearing chair to recluse herself, something that would never have happened without this campaign. Yeah, you can go to the next slide. In the end, nearing the hearing, we went back and forth negotiating different informal outcomes with the U's lawyer, and we ended up not taking any of these outcomes, any of these offers, and following the hearing through until the end, which ultimately was a very good decision because all of our suspensions were dropped in favor of a restorative justice option. And we also didn't have to pay a single cent of restitution. So this is a huge win for the students, and it would not have happened without every crucial part of our campaign. We also wouldn't have got through this without legal aid, which is another key element of a successful political repression campaign, is having lawyers who are friends of the movement. So we utilize the National Lawyers Guild along with other lawyers from our community here in Minneapolis. They worked as a team and they were very assertive, supportive, and understanding of our case, which was super necessary. And it's important to clarify that U of M SCS didn't just wake up one day and know how to carry out a successful political repression campaign. We learned from other community organizers who also might even be sitting here on this panel with me. But SCS nationally has been facing increased political repression in recent years. And as a national organization, we have learned what works and what doesn't work for student organizers. We have applied tactics, learning from those who have gone through similar academic and legal hearing processes for protesting. For example, the Tampa Five and Cal Poly Humboldt. And having advice backed by firsthand experience was like super, super helpful and shows how exchanging knowledge and experience is super important for organizers. So yeah, throughout these months, you can go through, or wait, I think this is the last slide. Yeah, maybe. Yes, I think it is. But throughout these months, my dedication to activism was definitely tested through all the ups and downs we experienced. I was trying to spend a semester abroad in France, which I ended up going to it in January, even knowing with the threat of I might be sent home halfway through and lose a lot of money. But I managed the time difference there with late night calls with lawyers and the hearings on Zoom. And I ended up being able to finish out my semester, and I'm going to be graduating on time this spring. So that's really exciting. And I would not have gone through any of these months if it weren't through my community who was there every step of the way offering support. Our city org friends were holding protests and posting on social media for us, and even helped pass a Minneapolis City Council resolution in solidarity with the protesters, urging the university to rescind all academic charges. So as I mentioned earlier, repression often has a way of alienating activists. This is a tactic used by the forces repressing us because they know we're stronger together. Again, this is why it's so important to have those skills and community in place so that when our brothers and sisters are put in these unfortunate situations, we always have each other's back. Especially in student organizing. So shortly before our occupation, last October actually, SDS had its national convention in Denver, Colorado, and we got to talk to student activists from all across the country. And I remember at the time realizing that all of our universities, like all of them, were cracking down on protesting during this time. And we saw common themes of tactics used by administrations, including implementing new protest policies, suspending student groups and individuals. And this is how we know that administrations are communicating with each other in order to learn about how better to repress us. But the wonderful thing I realized is that we are also talking to one another. And by doing so, we can learn what works in fighting back against repression. And we can continue to build our movements and resources and look out for one another. So, because like one of my favorite chants is who keeps us safe? We keep us safe. And so yeah, that's all I had today. But the struggle continues, and I hope you learned a little bit about this specific instance because truly, truly, when we fight, we win. So thank you for having me.
We are so happy that we got to have you. Thank you, Natalie. Your guys' struggle was really great because there aren't a lot of student organizers that have gotten to do both a community campaign and a student campaign. And so you had to fight against political repression on multiple fronts, and you guys really did that beautifully. Like, I mean, it was really cool to see as somebody not at the University of Minnesota, but to have you give us the larger Palestine solidarity movement a lot of political direction about what you wanted so that we could stand there and be with you. And I just feel like that was really important. So thank you. Before I introduce our last speaker, I wanted to point out that we don't have any questions that have been popping up in the little webinar chat, although lots of very positive praise. So for those of you who are speaking, you should be sure to check out all the like fists and hearts and different stuff that you're getting because you're like amazing. But it would also be great if people could start thinking of some questions so that when we're done with our last speaker, we could take a couple of them to have our panelists riff on them. Okay, so that's just a thought. If you could start thinking of questions, and if you don't, you could type them while Carlos is speaking, so then they're ready to go. Okay, so our next speaker is going to be Carlos Montes. Carlos Montes is a nationally respected leader in the Chicano immigrant rights and anti-war movements. He was co-founder of the Brown Berets, a Chicano working class organization in the US in the late 60s and 70s. And the Brown Berets were inspired by and often compared to the Black Panthers. Carlos was one of the leaders of the ELA Chicano blowouts, a series of walkouts in East LA. To protest against racism and inequality in Los Angeles area high schools. And he is actually featured in an HBO movie, Walkout. He is portrayed by Fidel Gomez. He is one of the ELA 13 indicted by a grand jury for conspiracy to disrupt LA USD. And with the Brown Berets, Carlos organized the first Chicano moratorium on December 20th, 1969, protesting the Vietnam War in East LA. In 2011, as Jess talked about, the Committee to Stop FBI Repression led a national campaign to defend Carlos from bogus charges. Currently, he's a leader in the immigrant rights movement through Centro CSO in Los Angeles. And we are excited to have Carlos talk with us tonight because the AWAN, the Anti-War Action Network, had released a statement in solidarity with Alejandro, one of the activists in his organization, because he was being charged and by the FBI, and they recently had a victory in that defense work. And so when we originally scheduled this, we thought we were all going to like learn about Carlos, learn from Carlos about the case, and then like put you guys all out there to be like, hey, you drop the charges on Alejandro. We already won that, okay? So like this is like a celebratory woo woo, But Carlos is going to do a great job of sort of wrapping this up because again, when you have a political fight back that's out in the community, not just like secretly behind closed doors with lawyers, that's where you win. And so, Carlos, welcome to the webinar, and we're really excited to hear what you have to say about your work and about Alejandro's case.
Much, Meredith, and it's great to be here with all these other great activists, all these great fights. You're right. When we unite, organize, we can win. And yeah, one thing I wanted to point out that Jess talked about is as activists, we're part of the community. We're in the community. We have to, organize with the community. The point is that when I got arrested back in 2011 for providing material support to terrorist organizations, the FARC and the PFLP, all the ladies in the community, the moms said, "Oh, Carlos no es terrorista, es un activista." They basically said, "Oh, Carlos is not a terrorist; he's an activist." In other words, because they know of my history of fighting for education, fighting against police abuse, they knew that I was being victimized by the state, right? But anyway, you're right. Alejandro Ariana is free. All the charges were dropped, right? That's awesome. On July 29, the federal government announced the conspiracy charges against the Chicano activist Alejandro were dropped. It's a victory for Centro CSO and a victory for all freedom fighters in the immigrant rights movement that are fighting against ICE terror, right? Let me just do a little background as to, what was going on. I mean, we started off the year denouncing and fighting against Trump reactionary agenda, right? We had the January 20th march, May Day, right? But once the ICE came and started raiding and attacking folks, Centro CSO and other community groups started marching downtown at the Metropolitan Detention Center. And we've done so many marches that I almost forgot all the dates. I remember on the June the 8th on a Sunday, we marched from Boyle Heights downtown to the Federal Metropolitan Detention Center. Because by then, Trump had already called the National Guards, in addition to the FBI, AFT, DEA, and the ICE, right? And when we got to the detention center, we were met with the National Guard. And before they announced anything, they started tear gassing us, right? So, we weren't ready with the gas mask or anything. So we marched back to Boyle Heights. So the next day we had another march, I think it was June the 9th, right? But this time we marched on the LAPD headquarters to denounce their collaboration with ICE. Even though LAPD and LA City said we're a sanctuary city, they still help ICE block traffic and security, right? Anyway, that was the 9th. The 11th, the ICE and the FBI stopped a young couple with their babies in the back seat in the middle of the street. They rammed their car. They stopped it. Luckily for us, one of our Centro CSO members was there and watched everything, was able to videotape that. They had supposedly a warrant to arrest a young man. But in the middle of the street, they were wearing masks, no IDs. In the middle of the street, they rammed the car, and then he wouldn't come out, so they tear gassed the car while the babies were in the back seat. We had a protest that same afternoon at Ruben Salazar Park, because that happened in the morning. So I'm just kind of giving you the conditions that were placed. People rebelling against the ICE, not only the ICE attacks, but the National Guard, and then they called in the Marines, right? So those are the conditions we're faced. So people are going out in the street and providing water, personal protective equipment, oranges, that kind of stuff, right? So Alejandro, what he was accused of just being in a truck out in the middle of a protest where people in the back seat were passing out personal protective equipment, water and hand sanitizer. All he was doing was sitting in a truck, right? Nothing, providing protective equipment is not a crime. Protesting is not a crime. So they convened a grand jury. One thing that people have pointed out, they did a grand jury and they indicted Alejandro and 3 or 4 unindicted co-conspirators, right? And the charge was conspiracy to commit public disorder, a felony, federal felony, right? And a conspiracy to aid and abet. Now, when they raided his house on June the 12th, 5 o'clock in the morning, before I forget, Alejandro is a real quiet guy. He's never been arrested. He was in the Marines, and he refused to continue being in the Marines as a conscientious objector. He joined Centro CSO about 10 years ago. We met him at a police commissioner's meeting, LAPD protesting, right? And he joined Centro CSO, and being part of Centro CSO, we encouraged him to organize in the working class. And he got a job at UPS. And eventually at UPS, he was elected to be a shop steward. So he's by his own peers, and there was an election, he had competition, right? So he was born and raised in East LA. and he goes by pronouns they, them, by the way. And 5 o'clock in the morning, they busted the door down. It was not only the FBI, it was the East LA Sheriff SWAT team. They had also raided my house, right? And the National Guard. They handcuffed his mom, his dad, his brother, right? And he just got out of work. He was trying to relax. They handcuffed him. They ransacked the house. They broke the window to his truck, right? And took all his computers and cell phone. But you know what happened? His neighbors started coming out and protesting. They thought it was a nice raid. Yeah, yeah. So, he lived right across his elementary school, and his teacher that he had in the second grade heard about it, and she came out and supported United Teachers of LA, one of the leaders, right? But yeah, the community came out and protested, right? When we heard about it, we mobilized right away. We were able to bail them out in a couple of days, right? And right away, we said, pack the courtroom, drop the charges. So I want to, first of all, say thank you to all the organizations that were part of a national campaign to drop the charges. We had the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, the National Alliance Against Racist Political Prejudice. We had SDS, you all were out there doing all kinds of work. We had Legalization for All Network. We had the Anti-War Committee. We had everyone doing national actions, call in, write in, and videos. So it was a truly national campaign demanding to drop the charges. We also exposed the DA there, a MAGA appointee, a local assembly person who MAGA all the way. He's anti-LGBTQ. He's anti-immigrant. He was appointed by Trump to be the U.S. attorney for this area. And by the way, he has not been confirmed by the Senate because the Senate, they're afraid that even some Republicans vote against him. He's so unqualified, right? So he is the one that pushed the charges on Alejandro and many others. And eventually he had to give in because there was no evidence. What was he doing? Parading personal protective equipment. Protesting is not a crime. So we exposed Bill Asaley, the Trump appointee, and it was a national campaign. And let me see, what else could I add here? So yeah, and the Teamsters came out and supported. Also, we got union support. Again, real critical to build a white coalition in this type of campaign. Be out front about it. Don't hide. Every time he would go to court, we walked in with him, with the family. We sit in the front row, looking at the judge, looking at the U.S. attorney. It's a federal case, not DA, right? And when we come out, we would do a press conference and demand drop the charges. And Alejandro would say, drop the charges on me, but every other protester in LA dropped the charges. So that's why we were successful. It was a national campaign, mobilized the local community. We united, with unions, the community. I'll emphasize that United Teachers of LA, they came out and organized a rally in support of Alejandro. As I mentioned earlier, his second grade teacher, Gloria Martinez, is a vice president of United Teachers of LA. 30,000 teachers came out and supported Alejandro. Let's see, what else? Oh, you know what? So the struggle continues. The ICE continues to raid. I know that the county, the city, the ACLU filed a lawsuit against Trump and ICE. And got a temporary restraining order. They're still violating the temporary restraining order. They're still doing the raids, right? So then, what else was I going to mention? And I'm telling you, these ICE folks, they are pigs. They are bold. Just last week, 50 of them, 100 of them with 50 cars rolled up on a meeting that Governor Newsom was having. And it was just, they were just having a meeting at the Japanese American National Museum. So they showed up to intimidate them. So I will say that, in the coalition building, I know sometimes we're critical of some politicians, but in this case, even our African American mayor, Karen Bass, has denounced the ICE and wants them out, right? So let me, I know I was going to say something else, but I forgot. Let me look at my notes here. Yeah, so a victory for the people. Alejandro is back at work at the Teamster Union. He's well known. But again, it was a group effort, and I forgot to mention something very important. He's also a member of Federal Socialist Organization, like I am. We recruited him several years ago, and he was open about it. He said, "I'm a Teamster, I'm in Centro CSO, and I'm a communist, I'm a Federal Socialist Organization." We didn't hide it. We're proud of it. And Centro CSO has grown a lot. That's another good point, that we've had meetings after all these activity where we went from 30 people to 100 people, and we're recruiting more folks. So thank you to everyone out there who participated, who wrote letters, who called in. I would call in to, "Where's Bill Asaley? I want to talk to you. Drop the charges," right? And one other thing they did do, there were 3 or 4 unindicted co-conspirators, so we were concerned they might go after them. They did go after one of the young woman, Mujer Vera Topete of Centro CSO. The FBI, 2 plainclothes FBI went. She was walking her dog at a park and grabbed her hand and took away her phone. They had a warrant to get her phone, So we also denounced that. So let me stop there. So hopefully there's some questions. So I'm real proud of all you out there that are fighting against repression. And, we don't hold back. If we come out bigger and stronger. We came out bigger and stronger in 2011, 2020, and Centro CSO, we come out bigger and stronger. Thank you very much. La lucha sigue, the struggle continues.
La lucha sigue, I agree. Thank you very much, Carlos. We're so excited not only to have you, but to be able to hear about this victory. That's awesome. I'm in the process of gathering different questions, and I think I've got my first one that we're going to go to. And I'm going to direct this one to Jess. Have you dealt with any unsuccessful campaigns against repression? And if so, what did you learn? And how did you keep your organizations agitated and encouraged? And what lessons can you apply to future campaigns? Because we have talked about our victories, because we have so many, but also, I think it's important to address that we learn from not winning as well, right? Those lessons suck, but we still learn from them. So I want to give you an opportunity to answer that one.
Yeah, so I mentioned that out of the investigation into the anti-war and international solidarity activists in our case, there were 2 other cases that that the investigation ended up bringing charges on. One was Carlos, he addressed that. The other is Rasmia Ode. Rasmia was, or is, an icon of the Palestinian liberation movement. She was living in Chicago. She had been in the US for 20 years. She initially came here to be with family, but got her citizenship and had been a citizen for about 10 years. Rasmia's life in Palestine was very difficult. She was a political prisoner. She had been tortured, including with sexual violence by the Israelis. She was released from prison as part of a prisoner exchange that the U.S. helped to negotiate. So the United States government knew who she was, did grant her entry to this country, and granted her citizenship. However, when the political police come for you, they want something. And so they delve deeper into Rasmia's applications. And somewhere on one of her applications, I think it was the citizenship application and not the initial application, there was a question about her criminal history. And because she had already been here for 10 years, she understood the question to be asking about any criminal history in the United States, which she had none. And in fact, her only so-called criminal history was from being a political prisoner in Palestine, which again, the US already knew about. And so the way that she answered that question, the government decided to determine 10 years later was a lie and sought to have her citizenship revoked and have her removed from the country. We had a massive campaign to defend Rasmia. She had a trial that took place in Detroit. We mobilized hundreds of people, most of them from Chicago, but a lot of us came from Minneapolis and other parts of the country to stand with her during that trial. And She lost the first trial, but she did a number of things in it that were very important. The main thing, and I think Rasmia herself would say was a victory in her case, is that she chose to put Israel on trial. The government wanted to make this a simple case of you told a lie on an application, and so you have to go. And Rasmia said, no, that so-called lie was not a lie. I misunderstood the question. And what you are talking about, you knew all about it, and I want to talk about it in court. And so she addressed the sexual violence and the other torture that she experienced in open court, or I should say she attempted to. But the prosecution and the judge silenced her in a way that folks who had followed political trials for a long time, like since I was a kid, including out of like Angela Davis's trial or trials like that, there's a long history of political activists being able to speak for themselves and say what they were doing and why they were doing it. And over again, Rasmia was silenced. So though the so-called crimes that she was alleged to have committed in Palestine against the Zionist occupation were the reason for the case, they wouldn't let her speak about it. But she did anyway. And she did get on the record that crimes of Israel against her. And that was very, very important. We also appealed her initial loss, and we won an appeal. The appeals court said that the trial judge had to go back and evaluate. In particular, there was an expert on sexual violence that she wanted to have speak and who the judge had denied. Appeals court said that reasoning on that wasn't right. You have to reconsider. And then Trump was elected, and the new Department of Justice brought a new set of charges against her, really escalating the political attack. And it was her assessment and that of her attorneys that the political climate at that time, and this was after his election in 2016, would not make it possible for her to be successful fighting the battle legally. So I'm giving a lot of context. I apologize. There's so many more things to talk about, but it's really important that it's a lesson to me. And when Rasmia, the decision was made by the second hearing, or at that first court date, I mean, and she was found guilty. We had a break before the sentencing, or whether the judge would decide whether or not she would be jailed awaiting sentencing. And we had a rally on the steps of the courthouse. And we live streamed Rasmia saying, doesn't matter, I've got this, we're going to keep fighting. She spoke very strongly. And then when we went back to court, the prosecution shared quotes from that video and suggested this was evidence that it wasn't safe for her to be released into the community. Anyway, it was really devastating. Long story short, sorry about that, long story long. The question was sort of the impact of that on our work and how we navigated that afterwards. Honestly, it was Rasmia's leadership that made it possible for people to go on. She set the example. She was like, this is not everything. This is just a thing. It's obviously important. She's committed to fighting, but she continues to be active in her community. She was deported, or I guess, what did they call it? Voluntary removal or whatever. But she was removed. She had to return to Jordan. But she continues her work there. And she was very encouraging to all of us. I think remembering that the end is not the end. The end of a single court case isn't the end of everything. And sometimes we can come back later and set it right, and sometimes we can't. But what we can do is make sure that we are upholding our principles, that we are defending what we believe in, and that we can walk away proud of that. And I'll stop talking there, but it's the worst story I have. I told it as best I could. It was really devastating to lose that case. And yet we had the leadership of an amazing veteran of the Palestinian struggle. Palestinians have been through a lot worse before and since, and she really showed us the way, which was to keep going.
Thank you.
Yeah.
The next one I want to give to Connor, Natalie, and or Maya, because I feel like it's a good question for a newer activist. It says, were you familiar with the legal system? How the legal system worked before experiencing political repression, and how did your experience, change or, shift your perception? And while you I'm hopefully that one of you will answer that. And then while you're answering, I'm going to quick go turn on the lights in my office and then I'm going to come back. So can I get a volunteer from Connor, Natalie, or Maya about, were you familiar with how the legal system works before experiencing political repression? And how did your experience shift your perspective?
I could say something quick. I mean, most of my experience wasn't really on the legal side of things. It was more like academic, but I will say I didn't really know anything about the legal system before all of this. Definitely like the most like biggest part was I had seen like civil disobedience happen before. I've been to protests where they've happened, and like my sister even was one of them before me, and so kind of like that was my go off of what I was expecting from this action. And then it was very different than like what happened was very different than what I was expecting. I didn't think I was gonna spend 2 nights in jail. I didn't think they could even do that. But they did. And I think kind of working with lawyers, I definitely learned a lot. Um, and it's definitely given me like a different perspective on every other case in the activist world. I think, yeah, that's all I have, I guess.
Thank you, Natalie. Maya or Connor, do either of you want to answer that? Okay, go for it, Maya.
I can say a little bit. I also didn't. I dealt with personally. I dealt with the academic stuff. But a lot of my friends were, or people, a lot of my comrades were talking to folks. They had a really good legal team. I know that. Um, and we also have a pretty strong network, I would say, of lawyers in New Orleans that definitely have varying opinions about what fighting against political repression looks like. And I think in my experience and what I've kind of gathered, I think it's a lot of conversations with people and looking at kind of what the options are and how you want to move forward. I know there were other comments of people asking like, well, how do you know how far to go and stuff like that. And I think there is a level of personalness to it. Um and I also think you can kind of figure out and decide if you want to take that risk and fight, because if it does go very well, it's so helpful to everyone on this call and everyone else like doing the work, and it then supports other people who might be arrested in the movement, to be able to look back at a case and say like, okay, well, the students at UMN did this, so maybe we can apply this tactic. So I think um talking to people with experience, talking to people who have been in the movement for a while, and figuring out your relationship with organizing and how much uh yeah, I think that's kind of what I'm thinking about. Yeah.
All right, Connor, are you weighing in or are we moving on to the next question?
Yeah, I'll weigh in. I didn't experience anything that I wasn't expecting, even though I haven't had a whole lot of experience with the legal system before. But it was very interesting seeing a lot of the corruption firsthand. For example, all the corrections officers, they had seen me in the news, they had seen the video, they knew I put my hands on their friend. They treated me very, very. I don't know. They were very antagonistic towards me. Obviously, looking for me to step out of line. And these officers, they're known for doing horrible things in this jail. There is a case going on right now of the death of a man named Charles Faggart, who his family and friends are organizing a campaign for him locally right now. He was in the same jail I was in, he was restrained, tortured, and beaten to death. And when I was in jail, I asked my cellmates if they knew him or they knew anything about him. They described, they pretty much said, yeah, somebody, they just did that to somebody last week. It happens every week. We call it Lockdown Thursdays. So it was very interesting, like getting to experience all of that firsthand, and very eye-opening to hear like directly what could have happened to me if the community hadn't been out there rallying for me.
Thank you, Connor. I want to do this other question that was typed in, and I want to appreciate Callie for helping it sort of get to me. A lot of our members have expressed concern around digital security and repression, especially using platforms like Google, where content is surveyed, screened, and data could be used to repress organizers. How serious are these concerns, and how can we best navigate using platforms for our organizing work that are easy and open to access, but also secure? How can we apply the lessons from historic victories in being public with our organizing in a shifting digital landscape? Do I have any volunteers to take that question? I guess the first thing that I would say is somebody who definitely had all of my emails subpoenaed, and my own workplace has repeatedly at different times investigated me by reading all of my emails on my work account. I think it's important to understand that anything that you say in an email is not private. And I think it's always important. And I think it's really important to realize that anytime you post something on social media, it's not private. And I think it's always important to think about, how would that look if that was projected on a really large screen at your defense trial? And, and if you don't think that would look so good, then maybe you shouldn't type that. So just being real. And that doesn't mean that you can't have private conversations in person with people that you trust. I'm just saying that, like, once you type it, it exists in the universe. And so I just think it's important to be thoughtful about that. Regardless of what email account you use. Anyone else want to take a stance on this question? How serious are these concerns, and how can we best navigate using platforms for our organizing work that are easy and open, access but also secure? How can we apply the lessons from historic victories in being public with our organizing in a shifting digital landscape? Anyone else want to weigh in on that one? Okay, Jess, I mean, I'm just, I'm having trouble figuring out, like, who is non-verbally expressing to me. Thank you. Go ahead, Jess.
I'm not a digital expert of any sort. I think that aside from the thing that Meredith mentioned, which was my first thought on the part of the question about how public to be with your ideas on the internet before you're facing repression, I think what I would say is there has to be a balance. There just has to be a balance, and you have to discuss it with the people you're organizing with. I will say, for example, in my organizing at this time, we use Google Docs for a lot of things. And if there's something that we know should be, or that we believe should be more, should never be, we wouldn't want to make it public, then we find another way to communicate it. That doesn't mean it can be or will be made public, but, and I'll say, I know, CryptPad is certainly a resource that I'm a little bit familiar with that people use, but I also, I use Google. So it's just, I think being aware of the risks and making sure that the people that you are organizing alongside have the same understandings and agreement about what will work for them, what can be done digitally, what should be done differently or kept more private is the principle. Having that mutual agreement with the people you are organizing together with.
Thank you. I'm going to direct this next one to Carlos. Not that other people can't answer this too, but I think particularly in what's happening in the immigrant rights movement, I think that this question, like, should go there first. This question is, one of the goals of political repression is to scare people out of protesting and organizing. How can we fight these scare tactics and convince people who might be afraid that we need to take to the streets? So how do we combat the fact that the whole point of all this political repression is to scare the crap out of us?
I mean, the first time, oh, excuse me, my sore throat. The first time that the raid, excuse me, the ICE had a big raid was Paramount City. There was a whole lot of them, right? But the community came out. And we call it the struggle in Paramount. I mean, there's a lot of cities where struggle has been risen, but Paramount City, the Chicano, Mexicano, Central American community came out spontaneously to protest ICE raids. So my response is that as organizers, we have to take the lead and being vocal and being public and organize the community to defend itself, And we cannot say, oh, there might happen a raid, we got to hide, we got to, we got to do the know your rights workshops, how to protect yourself, how to identify a real, what do you call it, arrest warrant if they come to your house. But we have been open. We've had so many protests and rallies, and we're going to denounce ICE at the big Chicano Moratorium rally at the end of the month. And we're going to stand in solidarity with Palestine, So, we do have, a large part of our community where I live that are so-called undocumented, but many of them have come out with us. They come out to meetings, they come out to marches and rallies, and they know there's a risk, but we have our own monitors for security. We protect ourselves. We're well organized, and do not, be afraid and stay home. You got to be open and bold and organize a community. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you, Carlos. Anybody else want to weigh in on this question? Because this is real. Like, for example, the whole reason why they're cracking down on college students, cracking down on Palestine solidarity protests is because they want there to be less protests. They don't want any more encampments. So how do we respond to that? Like, how do we get people to realize that actually their gut reaction, which might be, is to go, is like to keep going out. So other people want to weigh into that question.
Sure. Yeah, I think just like, especially on campus, I definitely see that as a real thing, a real fear as, they crack down, people kind of fall into that. I think like, again, just being as public about everything as possible, definitely like publicizing all of our wins and making it clear that it's not like a real fear, and also recognizing repression as what it is, calling them out on their bullshit, and like, making it clear that they're doing what they're doing because they're afraid of us, because they're afraid that I mean, it shows that like what we're doing is working, I think. Yeah, I don't know. It's a tough thing. It's like people will only listen to you if they want to sometimes, but yeah.
Anyone else want to address the question of how do we motivate people from the movements that are being attacked to actually come out and defend their right to protest? Maya.
I just want to reiterate what Natalie said. Yeah, the reason they're cracking down is because it's working. And I think really trying to nail in that point and yeah, really trying to nail in that point and say like, well, yeah, and because it shows so much. I think that's like what kind of the encampment, and even Alejandro's recent it shows us how little they actually care about us as individuals and as people, they being like they and how little they care about us, and how much we have to show them that we're not just gonna give up. It's so much easier said than done to just be like, well, yeah, blah blah blah, but it's a serious point. And like I was a student organizer for a while, and I had a lot of friends that didn't do student organizing, and they saw everything that happened to me on an academic level, and were like, this seems kind of fucked up. And I was like, yeah, let me tell you about it some more. So I mean, yeah, that's what I think. It's yeah.
I agree with Maya. A lot of the people who stood up and defended us, particularly in that first week, which then, like when those protests were successful, led to more successful protests. But particularly in that first week, it was people who knew us, right? People were like, I've protested with this person. Obviously, these claims of terrorism are like total BS. And so some of the people who are coming out to sort of defend that right to protest are people who are invested in you as humans, right? But also what we've seen in the Twin Cities is that a lot of the people who come out to defend the right to protest are also activists from other movements because they understand that like these are precedent setting things. You know, like if they are attacking the Palestine movement, right? And we are losing the ability to protest in the street, then that's going to affect the Black Lives Matter movement. That's going to affect the environmental movement. That's going to affect all these other movements. It's not like the cops are just going to go and attack one group of people. Like the fact is that we're sort of rallying and defending our ability to collectively protest together. And so I think that also is really helpful is that when you've created a culture in your community where people recognize that we are stronger if we're together and that we don't have to fight for the right to protest as like separate entities, that we have to fight for our right to protest together. And I do feel like that's something that also sort of shows a degree of like they punch and then we punch back. Like, you know, I think that there needs to be a response very quickly that says like, no, we are not letting you take these people. And so I think that that's an important piece. And I think that people that can be something that gets people to counter that fear. Is they're like, but it's going to get so much worse if we don't stand up for this. Like, I think that understanding that this starts a domino process, which leads to like us losing the ability to even have any space to criticize their government, I think that motivates people to come out. I have one more question I wanted to ask because I felt like it's going back to something that Jess laid out very clearly in the beginning. Because this is a question that everybody would want to know the answer to. The question is, if the FBI, quote unquote, just wants to talk. I love that. Like let's have coffee. No, they don't want to just talk. But anyway, but if they just want to talk, can you just refuse? Like what should your answer be if they don't have an arrest warrant and they just want to show up and talk to you? Like, what is your answer, Jess?
Any law enforcement officer that wants to ask you a question, including the FBI, can ask, and you don't have to answer. You can do it, and it's a style thing. You might be the guy that's like, no, and slams the door in their face. You might be uncomfortable with that and be the guy like, give me your card, I'll tell my lawyer. Like anywhere in between there is fine. Um, I think that the good thing to think about is for you as an individual, what would I say? Kind of have a plan in your head ahead of time if you're an activist. If you are not being detained, you can walk away. If you don't let them in your house, they don't get to come in your house without a warrant, et cetera, et cetera. So my advice would be think ahead about what your comfort zone is for how you will tell them that you will not speak to them, but do not speak to them. And then, I will add when our home was raided, my kid was 6 years old. And I had not had the talk with my kid before then, but then we did. And we talked to our kid about not answering questions. Should they be asked? What we told our kid was, if anyone tries to question you, you should say, I'm not allowed to answer questions without my mom's. But I think, I would also just suggest if you are doing the kind of activism that you think might bring scrutiny upon you, making sure that you have those conversations, if not with your kid, if like in my case, but your roommates or other people, so that folks know where you stand. I think it's also worth mentioning in our case, at least one person was approached at their job. The FBI came to their job and told their boss, we want to speak with so and so. Boss comes in and says, hey, so and so, the FBI is here to talk with you. So they had their boss and the FBI bossing them around. And, this person went to where their boss told them to and then said, I'm not going to talk to you. You can talk to my lawyer. So I think the main advice is whatever you do, don't talk to them. Figure out ahead of time what your personal style is on how you're going to say no, and then share that plan with people who are in your life that might also get caught up in those situations.
And there was a follow-up question where someone asked, like, well, what if you don't have a lawyer arranged? Like, you don't have to have a lawyer pre-arranged. You can say, I'm not interested in answering your questions, but you can give me your card. And then you could get a lawyer, and then that lawyer will call back that person and say, you're not allowed to ask questions to my client without me being present, and no, my client does not want to talk to you. And so like you can have that step happen later, but you shouldn't answer those questions even about simple things, because they literally just try to sort of get you to open the door, metaphorically speaking, or actually, and sort of start the word train. And you need to shut that word train down, because they're going to start with really small stuff, and the next thing you know, it's like, whoa, no, why are we having this conversation? Like, I'm not talking with you. And so you really have to be upfront about, no, we're not talking about anything. Okay. So our goal was for this to be done at 8:30. It's 8:35. That's for Central Standard Time. For those of you who are in other time zones, you're like, that's not 8:35. But I live in the Midwest, so therefore so does my time zone. We really want to thank you for coming and tuning in to this webinar from the Anti-War Action Network. We really want to thank all of our speakers. If you are an at-home watcher, let's give a round of applause to our panelists who shared their own experiences battling against political repression and the lessons that they've learned. Unfortunately, we're going to learn more lessons. I mean, if you've, learned anything from the Trump administration, we're going to learn more lessons. But the fact is that we're going to learn those lessons together, and we're going to stand up and fight back together. And the Anti-War Action Network is a place, one of many national organizations like the Committee to Stop FBI Repression, where we can work with activists and organizations to really amplify those calls for saying no. Protesting in the streets is not a crime, or as the case that was talked about from Alejandro, passing out PPE is not a crime. I mean, that's just ridiculous. But the fact is that we have the opportunity to amplify these calls and really defend each other, and then also live to fight another day, right? And continue on and do organizing so that in the end we can win. So thank you so much for tuning in. And there was one other question where somebody asked, like, can you share the contact information for the speakers? And I don't feel comfortable doing that because I didn't ask that of them beforehand. But I can say that you could email the Anti-War Action Network, and I could send that question to any of the speakers. And our email address is Anti-War Action Network, all one word, all lowercase, @gmail.com. So if you wanted to send a question to a speaker, you could, and I could forward that on, and then they could choose whether or not to answer you. But I don't feel like I have permission to do that. But yes, thank you, Kaylee. So that's in the chat. So if people wanted to email a follow-up question, you could. In the meantime, keep protesting, because we got a lot of work to do, regardless of what movement you're in. If you're in the movement for Black Lives, if you're in the student movement, if you're in the immigrant rights movement, if you're in the Free Palestine movement, but we got work to do. But let's use these lessons so we can defend our work. Thank you very much for coming.
Everyone, keep up the work.
Solidarity, y'all.
Continue.
Solidarity.